As the sun set on our wedding day, a warm breeze rustled the petals of the flowers that adorned the outdoor venue. It was a perfect scene, straight out of a fairy tale. I stood there, heart racing, my hand in Christopher's, ready to embark on this new chapter of our lives together. "My beautiful Margaret," Christopher whispered, his eyes locked onto mine, filled with affection. "I can't believe this day is finally here." I smiled, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. "I know, Christopher. It feels like a dream come true." We exchanged vows that we had written ourselves, promises that came from the deepest corners of our hearts. Our families and friends watched with teary eyes as we promised to support each other through thick and thin, to be each other's rock, and to cherish the love we had found. As we exchanged rings, Christopher's voice trembled with emotion. "With this ring, I give you my heart and my love, now and forever." Tears welled up in my eyes as I repeated the words, slipping the ring onto his finger. "With this ring, I give you my heart and my love, now and forever." The applause and cheers that followed were a symphony of joy, celebrating our union. The evening was filled with laughter, dancing, and heartfelt toasts. I could see the pride in our parents' eyes as they embraced us, welcoming us into this new chapter of our lives. As the night came to a close, Christopher took my hand, leading me to a quiet corner under the twinkling stars. "Margaret," he said softly, his eyes locking onto mine, "I promise to always be there for you, to love and support you, to make you smile even on the toughest days." I leaned in, my heart full of love for this man who had become my partner in life, and I promised to stand by your side, to be your confidant, your partner in all adventures, and to cherish every moment we share. He held me close, his embrace a promise of the love that would only grow stronger with time. In that moment, surrounded by the love and warmth of our wedding day, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we were ready to face them together, hand in hand, heart in heart. As the initial excitement of our wedding began to settle, I noticed a shift in dynamics that left me feeling uneasy. My husband, Christopher, and I had moved into a charming house that we could call our own. It was the perfect place to start our married life, yet there was an undercurrent of tension that I couldn't ignore. One evening, after a pleasant dinner at home, Christopher and I settled onto the couch, sipping wine and talking about our day. Just as we were sharing a lighthearted moment, the doorbell rang. Christopher's expression changed ever so slightly as he got up to answer it. Evelyn, my mother-in-law, stood at the door, a commanding presence in her elegant attire. She greeted me with a polite smile, but it was Christopher's reaction that caught my attention. He seemed to tense up, his posture shifting almost imperceptibly. "Christopher, dear, could you help me with these bags?" Evelyn asked, her tone sweet, but with an edge of authority. "Of course, Mom," Christopher replied almost instinctively and headed towards the door. I watched as they carried in bags of groceries and belongings. Christopher was attentive, responding to his mother's requests without question. It was as if he had slipped back into a role he had played for years, a dutiful son catering to his mother's needs. Later that night, as we got ready for bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. "Christopher," I began, choosing my words carefully. "I couldn't help but notice that your mother seems to have quite an influence over you." He looked at me, a hint of unease in his eyes. "She's my mother, Margaret. It's important to me that I take care of her." I understood the bond between a parent and child, but this seemed to go beyond mere care. "Of course, Christopher, but we're married now, and I thought our decisions would be based on what's best for us as a couple." He sighed, his shoulders slumping. "I know, Margaret, and I'll try to strike a balance. But you have to understand, she's been a big part of my life for a long time." The conversation left a lingering unease in my heart. I had entered this marriage believing in the strength of our love, but it seemed like there were unresolved dynamics that I hadn't fully grasped. As the days went by, Evelyn's visits became more frequent, and I began to wonder if the shadow she cast over our relationship was something we could overcome together. The weeks turned into months, and the uneasy feeling that had settled within me only grew stronger. Evelyn's presence in our lives seemed to intensify, her visits more frequent, and her influence more pronounced. Each time she came over, I felt a knot forming in my stomach, a mixture of anxiety and frustration. One evening, after a particularly tense visit, I found myself alone with Christopher in our living room. The air was thick with unspoken words, and I knew I couldn't ignore the situation any longer. "Christopher," I said gently, breaking the silence, "I've noticed that your mother's visits have been quite overwhelming lately." He looked at me, his expression a mix of guilt and helplessness. "Margaret, I know it's not easy for you, but she's my mother, and I can't just stand up to her." I took a deep breath, struggling to find the right words. "I understand that, Christopher, but our marriage is a partnership. When your mother criticizes me or bosses me around, I need you to support me." He looked conflicted, torn between his loyalty to his mother and his commitment to me. "Margaret, I promise I'll try my best, but it's not easy to change things overnight." Tears welled up in my eyes as I realized the depth of the challenge ahead. "Christopher, I don't want to come between you and your mother, but I also need to feel respected and valued in our marriage." He reached out and took my hand, his touch comforting. "I love you, Margaret, and I'll do everything I can to make things better." To make things better. Despite his reassurances, I couldn't shake off the feeling that our marriage was becoming a battleground, a place where I constantly had to fight for my place. The whispered conversations between Christopher and his mother, the way he retreated into silence when she criticized me, it was becoming unbearable. Days turned into weeks, and the cycle continued. Each time I tried to address the issue with Christopher, he would promise change, but ultimately fall back into the same patterns. The whispers of discontent grew louder within me, and I began to wonder if our love was enough to overcome the obstacles that were surfacing in our relationship. The tension in our home had reached a breaking point, and I couldn't ignore the sense of unease any longer. Christopher's behavior and his mother's constant interference were pushing me to the brink. But what happened next would send shockwaves through the foundation of our marriage. It was a quiet evening, and Christopher and I were going about our routines, each lost in our own thoughts. Suddenly, the shrill sound of the house phone shattered the stillness. Christopher's reaction caught my attention. He jumped up from his seat, his face paling ever so slightly. "Let me get that, Margaret," he said, his voice uncharacteristically tense. I furrowed my brows in confusion, but before I could say anything, he had already picked up the phone and moved into another room, closing the door behind him. A feeling of suspicion gnawed at me, and an idea struck me like lightning. Carefully, I reached for my phone and activated the recording feature, placing it on the table near the door. As I strained my ears, I could make out fragments of the conversation Christopher was having behind that closed door. "No, Mom, I don't think she suspects the money is missing." My heart skipped a beat, and a wave of shock washed over me. What was he talking about? The words hung in the air, searing themselves into my memory. Without realizing it, I had held my breath, my hands trembling as I listened intently. When Christopher finally emerged from the room, he seemed almost composed, as if nothing had happened. But I had heard enough to realize that there was something he was hiding from me. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the cryptic conversation I had just overheard. Later that night, as Christopher slept beside me, I lay awake, replaying those words in my mind. "No, Mom, I don't think she suspects the money is missing." The implications were impossible to ignore. My heart felt heavy with a mixture of confusion, anger, and betrayal. The next morning, I listened to the recording again, my determination solidifying. It was time to confront Christopher to uncover the truth that had been lurking in the shadows. I knew I couldn't continue living in uncertainty, not when the foundation of our marriage was at stake. With a heavy heart, I steeled myself for the difficult conversation that lay ahead. The truth had to come out, no matter how painful it might be. The whispers of discontent that had plagued us for so long were about to give way to a revelation that would shake the very core of our relationship. The weight of the revelation hung over me like a dark cloud as I grappled with the truth I had uncovered. Christopher had been hiding something, and the words I had heard on that recorded conversation echoed in my mind, refusing to fade away. The following day, while Christopher was out, I took a deep breath and opened my laptop. I logged into my bank account, my heart pounding as I scanned through the transactions. The evidence was undeniable. A substantial amount of the money I had earned was gone. Out of the $1 million, only $430,000 remained. My hands trembled as I realized the magnitude of what had happened. The suspicion that had gnawed at me for so long was confirmed. Evelyn had been stealing money from me, and Christopher had been complicit in keeping this secret. When Christopher returned home that evening, I could barely contain my emotions. "We need to talk," I said, my voice shaking, my eyes locked onto his. He looked surprised by the intensity in my tone. "Margaret, what's wrong?" I took a deep breath, my heart racing. "I heard that conversation, Christopher. The one you had on the phone. The one about the money." His face paled and his eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape. "Margaret, I can explain." I held up my hand, stopping him. "No, Christopher, let me speak. I checked my bank account, and I know that a significant amount of money is missing. And I heard you say you didn't think I suspected it." He looked defeated, his shoulders slumping. "Margaret, I didn't know how to tell you. It's my mother. She's been taking the money." I felt a mixture of anger, hurt, and betrayal. "And you knew about this? You kept it from me." He looked down, unable to meet my gaze. I couldn't go against my mother. She said she needed the money, and I didn't know what to do. Tears welled up in my eyes as the reality of the situation hit me. "Christopher, we're supposed to be partners, a team. You should have told me, no matter how difficult it was." His voice was barely a whisper. "I know, Margaret. I should have. I'm so sorry." The truth was out, and it was more painful than I could have imagined. The betrayal ran deep, and the chasm between us felt insurmountable. As I looked at the man I had married, I struggled to reconcile the person I thought he was with the person standing before me. In that moment, I knew that our marriage was at a crossroads. The choice ahead was a difficult one: to try to repair the damage that had been done, or to acknowledge that some wounds were too deep to heal. The revelation had shattered the fragile trust between us, and I had to decide whether to move forward or to let go. The weight of the truth hung heavy in the air, casting a shadow over our home. The revelation of Evelyn's theft and Christopher's complicity had severed the bonds of trust that had once held our marriage together. The time had come for a confrontation that would define our paths moving forward. The next day, I called for a meeting at our home. Evelyn arrived, her usual composed demeanor masking the turmoil that was about to unfold. Christopher, his eyes heavy with regret, stood by my side as we faced the woman who had brought us to this point. Seated around the table, the tension in the room was palpable. My heart raced as I pressed play on the recording, allowing the damning words to echo in the silence. As the words played, Evelyn's face shifted from surprise to a mix of guilt and defiance. Christopher looked down, unable to meet her gaze. When the recording ended, the silence stretched on, heavy with unspoken truths. "Evelyn," I finally spoke, my voice trembling but firm, "why did you do this to me?" She sighed, her shoulders slumping. "Margaret, I needed the money. You have more than you need, and I thought you wouldn't miss it." My anger flared, but I struggled to keep my emotions in check. "That doesn't justify stealing from me, Evelyn. What you did was wrong." Christopher finally spoke up, his voice laden with regret. And I should have told Margaret about this. I should have stood up for her. Evelyn looked at him, her expression a mix of disappointment and sadness. Christopher, you don't understand the pressure I was under. I had debts to pay, and I didn't know what else to do. I took a deep breath, my voice steadier now. Evelyn, I don't deny that you may have faced difficulties, but that doesn't excuse your actions. And Christopher, your loyalty to your mother should never have come before your loyalty to our marriage. Christopher's gaze finally met mine, his eyes filled with remorse. Margaret, I'm so sorry. I know I failed you. I looked at the two people before me, feeling a mixture of anger and sadness. I've had enough. This marriage, built on secrets and betrayal, cannot continue. I deserve better, and I refuse to live in a relationship where trust has been shattered. With a heavy heart, I stood up, my voice unwavering. I'm going to file for divorce. It's time for us to go our separate ways. Evelyn's eyes welled up with tears, her regret evident. Margaret, I'm never meant for things to turn out like this. As I walked away from the table and out of the house, I felt a mix of emotions, pain, relief, and a glimmer of hope for a future where I could rebuild my life on my own terms. The courtroom would become the arena where justice would be served, where the truth would be laid bare for all to see. As the gavel fell, a new chapter would begin. One where I could finally reclaim my voice and my identity, free from the shadows of betrayal that had haunted me for far too long. Leaving the shattered remains of my marriage behind, I embarked on a journey to seek justice for the betrayal that had torn apart my life. The courthouse became my refuge, a place where truth and accountability would be upheld. With determination burning in my heart, I stood before the judge and told my story, a story of theft, lies, and broken trust. The trial was a roller coaster of emotions. I recounted the pain I had endured, the moments of doubt, and the strength it took to stand up for myself. My ex-husband, Christopher, and his mother, Evelyn, were forced to face the consequences of their actions as the evidence was laid bare for all to see. As the trial came to an end, the judge delivered the verdict. The weight of the truth had shifted the scales of justice in my favor. Christopher and Evelyn were ordered to pay $1 million in compensation for the financial and emotional damage they had caused. Walking out of the courtroom, I felt a mix of relief and closure. The legal battle had been exhausting, but it had also been a powerful reminder of my strength and resilience. The compensation was not just about the money. It was a symbolic victory, a recognition that I had been wronged and that justice had been served. With the weight of the trial behind me, I embarked on a new chapter of my life. The scars of betrayal were still there, but they no longer defined me. I was free from the shackles of a toxic marriage, and I was determined to rebuild my life on my own terms. The journey ahead was uncertain, but I faced it with newfound strength and a sense of empowerment. The echoes of deceit and betrayal would eventually fade, replaced by the echoes of my own voice, my own dreams, and my own triumph over adversity. And so I walked away from the courthouse, my head held high, ready to embrace the future with hope and the unwavering belief that I could shape my destiny, a destiny that was finally mine to create.